There's some other evidences that a lot of people treat as if they are, and they are, a lot of them are kind of, like you went said, conspiracy theory, but we know that where there's smoke, there's often fire, and when we take this revelation in account with all the other information that we have, we start to see why Freddie Crystal showed up in Kanab, why we have the Three Lakes, why we have the map rocks, why we have the McConkey Ranch petroglyph plant panels that look like aliens from outer space,
or
Aztec warriors,
Roman kings.
or Roman kings. We start to see anybody that's done enough research like you have. I'm not going to say I have. I've done a lot of research, but I'm not on the same level as you. And a lot of the stuff I've got
You're
is
just on a different level.
all right. I'm on a it's not a higher level.
I'll decide.
It's another dimension, is what it is. Okay. But we start to see that these other stories, rumors, traditions, the underground cities in the Grand Canyon, a lot of these things that scientists or a lot of people will say is a hoax. All of a sudden, some of these things start to make sense as to why these people were coming back to traditional lands, or why did the Aztecs go back, or why did the Spanish retrace supposedly how did they get their information and retrace all the way into what's now the central United States, looking for this famed city of gold?
Should we tippy-toe into that a little bit or save it for another segment?
It's probably too big for this segment, but I just
Okay,
wanted to touch on it a little bit.
Let me tease them a little bit. Columbus, did that come out kind of weird?
Columbus.
Columbus.
What you got in your coffee?
Hey, I've had a chest cold all winter long. So get off my back. Columbus knew exactly where he was going. Okay, and he knew what he was going to find. And I don't care what this other guy, I can't even remember his name, that was writing all these letters to him, and Columbus knew where he was going.
And he had enough information that he was able to convince the Queen to support him.
That's exactly what convinced them, is because they knew this place existed. They knew their ancestors had been there. This information has started getting handed down ever since it was first created. And you can read about it in the first book of Kings. Yes, the Bible.
Yep.
A little story about King Solomon when he sent his friend, the king of Tyre, Hiram, to this mythical land called Ophir, which, of course, the academic world, because they just can't conceive something so big.
That men could get on a ship.
You notice they always blame Africa?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it had to be down in Africa.
Yeah.
Okay, it wasn't in Africa. And the Queen of Sheba wasn't from Africa. It's a cool story, but we're not going to go there right now.
Right.
This information, this is what the royal bloodline is all about. His descendants from King David, King Solomon, all of them, that's royal bloodline.
Trying to preserve their...
Any information that was acquired then and acquired later and so forth is handed down from one royal family to the next. Next thing you know, instead of brothers and sisters and cousins, you got fifth cousins 3 times removed ruling over Wales, whereas you might have the, several times removed cousin ruling over Germany. Okay?
Right.
The information gets scattered, and next thing you know, these guys aren't getting what they feel is their fair share, and these guys aren't getting what they're getting, so one of them goes up and pulls all the information out of the Imperial Library of Constantinople and then lights it on fire and stands around like this going oh gee, God, it all got lost, it's all burned up, so you guys don't worry about it, it's all gone. And same thing I think happened with the library at what's called Alexandria.
The Library of
Okay.
Alexandria.
It's a control thing.
Yeah.
And what is it that's over here that is
So important they gotta
so
hide.
important that they have to go through all this trouble to change history and hide history?
Right. We're in another segment. We're going to talk about all the people that came here and the evidences of those people coming here. That different civilizations, whether it be the British, the Welsh, the some of the Syrians.
I lean towards the
Israelites.
Welsh because they're my ancestors.
Right. Right. And then talk also about the quote unquote the Iberian Peninsula, the Bering Strait, and all that theory. What we have today with DNA techniques is we have the absolute ability to prove exactly what's happened and how it's happened, but science and scientists refuse to go there because they have just enough of a picture of what happened that does not correspond to their theory of history.
It painted such a beautiful picture that they couldn't possibly conceive it, and so they threw their hands in the air and said, well, we're back to the bones.
Yep. Yep. They couldn't conceive that man had the technology, the ability, the fearlessness to jump on boats thousands of years before Columbus and sail across the ocean. But there's plenty of evidence both in history and on the ground in these stories, traditions. The petroglyphs have a lot of information if it's interpreted correctly that gives a lot of clues. We have records of hieroglyphics of different languages, some known that tie to the old world and some unique and of themselves that are unknown. And of course scientists will just say it's a hoax rather than confront the obvious implications of what that means. I was watching a recent video. I watch YouTube videos too, and I was watching a recent video that talked about a DNA study that was done on some indigenous white people that were from the islands, white islanders.
Racist.
Yeah, and how when they did their DNA studies, they were shown to be from over in Asia. They were shown to be no, they were Assyrians from the Assyria area. And so when we really look at different studies and stuff, it verifies some of these traditions that are had among the natives here in America, as well as what few records we have, and it all seems to come together into this melting pot.
Well, one of the reasons, and we talked about this earlier, but one of the reasons that we seem to, get off track and go
It's
over
easy
this
to go onto a
topic and this
tangent.
topic and over here. I'm telling you, it's absolutely unbelievable, but all of it is connected.
Ties together.
If you want to understand the Spanish, you need to understand the Aztecs. If you want to understand the Aztecs, you got to understand the Puebloans. You want to understand the Puebloans, you need to understand the Anasazi. If you want to understand the Anasazi, you need to understand there's no such thing as a Fremont.
Yep, I agree with you there. I think it was the city people and the country people.
You gotta understand the true nature of the history of this continent, regardless of where the source material came from.
Right.
You have to look at all possible source material. I don't care how unpopular it is with you. I don't care whether you believe it or not. If it's a story about this continent professed by any group out there, you need to look at it.
Yep.
Because the only way you're ever going to know the truth is if you try, without an agenda, to prove or disprove.
Right. Yep.
And you'd be surprised what comes up ringing very loudly as truth.
Yep. Yep. We have and archaeological evidences show that these individual people, tribes, nations, groups, whatever, indigenous people traded all up and down and amongst themselves, and when they do excavations and stuff, they find these evidences, and a lot of times they'll set them aside and won't include them in their studies because they don't know, they can't justify it, the rationale behind it, without admitting that they were highly connected, and probably a lot of them from the same groups of people.
I'm gonna take a little leap of faith here. 10 years ago, probably more like 5, Oak Island. I said it then, I'll say it again, because now I can say it. They're going to find evidence of Roman culture. They've been there, okay? I'm gonna tell you right now, eventually, they're gonna come up with something that shows that either, because I don't know that they're gonna be able to determine which is which, Welsh or Britain, or Britons, okay? And the reason for this, the reason they find so many different things at Oak Island, it was a stopping point.
Right.
It was a port.
It was a cache location.
Pull in, unload your boats, cache it. Yes, there's something at Oak Island.
Sure.
And there's probably still something under that island.
There's probably more somethings there than they even have any history
And a
of.
lot of it's been moved and
Right.
taken where it was intended to go. That was
Right.
just the stopping point.
Yeah.
I
And
wish they'd pay attention to the Southern
if
Cross
you had, yes, if you
and go in
had,
that direction.
if you wanted to prevent somebody from finding what you hid, wouldn't you make a big, huge disturbance in one spot that made it look like there was a money pit, and then bury it, take it 100 feet down, and then maybe put something there, but maybe not. But maybe the real treasure was right off the coast in 6 feet of sand, where you could come back and load it or unload it in a few hours, rather than
Maybe.
just throwing that out there. I think there's things that are, I think that when they, depending on what their purpose for it was, if that wasn't not supposed to be a permanent location, they're not going to go through the amount of work that they did there.
Well, I think the reason that they went to the amount of work that they did there, you know, the show basically dried up 5 years ago, and it stayed dry for a few years. Last year it started getting interesting. This year it's getting even more interesting. I'm not going to get hung up on all the commercials. I'm not going to get hung up on the 15-minute repeats of what you saw the week previous.
Right.
Okay, have a little patience. Watch the show. Pay attention to the details, to the things that they're finding. They're significant. Sometimes the most significant evidences that you find are very, very small. Okay?
Right.
And that's why I tune into the show, because I like what they're finding.
Yeah.
They're uncovering an untold history. It's an
And
awesome show.
And they're meticulously documenting everything, which is unlike your average treasure hunt.
You know, all the skeptics that I go and read on their Facebook page and whatever, you know, come on, I challenge any one of you, to explain some of the things that they found.
Away some of the things that were found in different areas, yeah.
You know, like the spear that they found, you know, and one guy pops up and said something about carp spearing, you know. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you know, you'll find a lot of those down by the north end of Utah Lake in one of these days.
One of my favorite ones on the show recently was the little lead cross that they found, that just, through research, they just happened to find it on a wall back in, I don't remember whether it was France or Spain or where it was, of the Knights Templar.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact location either, but it's where
They
the
had
Knights
a
Templars
very
were held captive.
accurate depiction of that same cross. But what's interesting to me is I know of a cross that's not exactly that. There has some similar features on it. It was not lead, it was copper, that was found in southern Utah in a excavation. And I won't mention where, but I was on the excavation when they found it. And they found some copper bells, they found some...
Well, that must have been a Spaniard carrying his family heirloom around and he dropped it. Like the Spaniard that brought his family's heirloom armor, scale armor, and he lost it. You know, he
I don't know, the
couldn't, he couldn't
Spanish had
afford
scale
the
on it.
higher end mesh armor, you know,
Right.
and you know keep up with the
Chainmail
boys.
or whatever.
So he didn't get the girls,
Yeah.
you know, because he wasn't up to date. But you know, God, those poor Spaniards.
Yeah, everything was attributed to him. But I was on that dig, by the way, where we found that copper cross and the copper bells. And,
I recall another dig.
that
you were
never-
on.
that never entered into any record whatsoever because, for whatever reason, it didn't fit with the narrative
Mhm.
of what they were doing.
I recall.
Either that or they were concerned that there was going to be mass looting by the local townspeople that were in the
Oh
area.
shit! Sorry, got a cold going. I recall another little artifact that you found on a dig that didn't quite fit.
Well, that was close to that area, but that was on a survey. One of the things that we did on our off days when we were supposedly having a break was we would go. We had projects for the state of Utah and the state of Arizona that facilitated universities or other studies, or for the BLM or Forest Service information. We would go out to these areas and we would survey. It's archaeological surveying where we're looking for evidences of locations, civilizations. We're looking for petroglyphs, any kind of art panels, rock structures, kivas, pit houses.
Kind of like Cortez when he went in and started looking at all the records and trying to find where he
Yeah.
needed to destroy it.
Well, not quite that, but that
Okay.
detailed. But we would split out and we would mark off areas on the map, and it was rough surveying. Well, on one of these surveys, I found a ball that I thought at first was made out of obsidian because it was actually like almost grayish white, light colored obsidian, but it had a black tinge to it. And it was a perfectly round ball, and it had all these strange carvings. I call them hieroglyphics carved in there. They didn't like that term, hieroglyphics, you know. And while we were surveying, I found that on a piece on the ground in an area that was a village area. And the lady that was over, I'm not going to mention her name, but there was a professor and then a lady who's a well-known professor. She's a professor too, and her husband was actually a tribe. She was married to a tribe leader, which was convenient because anytime they needed to do something, they had to go to this tribe to get permission. So she just knock on her husband's door or office door and say, "Hey, honey, no, I'm being facetious." But anyway, I picked this up and I showed it to Doc and to this lady who was in charge of the surveying. And they looked at it, they scratched their heads, they looked at it, and if I'd have been smart, I'd have just put it in if I knew then what I know now, I would have just put it in my pocket and not said a thing. Because rather than entering it into the survey, which is meticulously, it was on graph paper, they had all the little features and things we found on this piece of graph paper, and rather than marking that on there with a little X or a little circle or whatever, they didn't enter it into the expedition information. And I asked him, I says, "Well, why didn't we do this?" I said, "This is part of the survey." "Well, it's out of context." "How's it out of context?" "Well, it probably came from a later thing, or as a medicine man, or a gaming piece, or something, but we don't really know what it is, so we're not going to put it in there and confuse people." And I said, well, I was upset because I said,
Why
if
not?
we take enough of this unusual information out of the picture, we will never get to a point where we see the big picture.
They could have called it a Fremont.
Yeah. But it was very interesting. It was the closest thing I could call it was,
You're going to use that word, aren't you?
no, I'm not. I'm not going to use the offensive Egyptian term that Dan always gets chapped about. But it had hieroglyphics on there, unknown writings on there, and lines, like a cartouche or to me it had a message on there. I don't know what that message was. I wish I'd have taken. I didn't have even a camera with me at that time. We didn't have cell phones and cameras in our phones.
And so what happened to this little ball?
Well, it sat on the desk of the professor in charge of all of southern Utah, sat on his desk until he died. And when he died, I'm pretty sure that the lady that was in charge of the expeditions, and she's now down in southern Arizona somewhere, ended up with it. But it never went into the record. It was never on display. It never went into our survey information. And I had enough of those experiences that I lost respect for what was going on there. I lost respect for academia, and decided that if I was going to ever find out any information, truthful information, I was going to have to do my own research. And unfortunately, to go out and gather information and things like that, they've made it illegal through the Antiquities Act and everything, so you've got to be very careful. You've got to document things. And so that's what's kind of grown into this Napa Research, is the nonprofit organization that we put together, chartered, to be able to study these things and get funding from like-minded individuals that want to know and understand the true history of the past, and be able to go out and document it photographically, whether it's surveying or through research, and then document these things so that if somebody from the scientific world or any eluder or whatever defaces, takes, or steals these items, at least the information will not be lost to history.
Right, for example, we don't know how important it could be, but that little ball, if you hadn't have just told the story, okay, that piece of information is gone.
That's right.
Forever. Nobody will ever know that little ball was where it was.
Right.
Okay? You'll never know.
What was interesting about that ball is they determined that it was actually on smoky quartz.
It was what?
On quartz. It was a really highly refined piece of smoky quartz, which you
One of
don't
these
really
days you
find in
gotta
that
take
area.
me and show me exactly where you got it, because I'm pretty familiar with the area.
You've been there many times. It's not very far from the area where all the
Glyphs.
petroglyphs are on the ground.
Yeah, and I said, someone asked me one day when he took me there, he says, "What do you think this is all about?" And I says, "Well, I don't know, perhaps information to tell you where you can get better banking or something, but I says, but I do know that this one over here says there's some ruins up on the hill here." And he went, "Which hill?" And I said, "Well, this hill." Boy, they took off like like a bat out of hell. Went up there and started looking up. Sure enough, there was ruins up there.
Right. Well, I'm sure that this little ball was associated with that. That is an informational map.
Is that the one where the skull was just under the surface and somebody stumbled across it one day? And
Not very far from there.
yeah, and then we covered it back up.
Right. It's coming out of the wash. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of kivas.
It's lighter than a 50 caliber, huh? A little more awkward though. Whoa!
Nowadays, now I hurt my shoulder for
No, wait, let's put it over there.
Hey!
Okay.